Victor here today with a video here on YouTube to show you how to set up a Tableau server to run in Amazon's EC2 Elastic Compute Cloud Service on AWS. And so obviously the first kind of step in this is to go ahead and log into our Amazon Web Service console, which I'm going to do right now. And when we log in here, you can see that we have a number of different services to choose from. In our case, what we're going to do is go ahead and click on EC2 because that's what we're trying to do. And once we go into EC2, you'll see that if you have some instances out there, which I do, they may go ahead and be there, but what we're going to do is start up a new one. So I want to start a new instance here. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start that instance on Microsoft Windows Server 2008, and then I'm going to use the base edition here. So I've selected that. Now, obviously here you have a number of different choices in terms of how you want to size this thing and what it will cost you. Obviously, you know, the bigger the box here, the more it might cost you per hour in order to run this. But what I'm going to do is, you know, the thing that really will make Tableau server run the best is if you optimize for memory. So you have quite a bit of memory in terms of the number of processors that you're going to go ahead and run that on. So I'm going to choose here this R3 2 extra large, which basically gives us 8 virtual cores and 61 gigs of memory. And in this case, 160 gigabyte SSD drive, which is enough for our purposes. Obviously, if you were doing this for real in production, you'd probably choose a little higher volume disk drive. But so the next thing I'm going to do is, you know, go over here and just choose a default zone based off of the network that it's on. And then I'm going to go to add storage. Now this is something that can kind of grab you if you're not careful. And you want to make sure, being how we selected 160 gigabyte SSD drive when we first started to launch this thing, but it's going to default to a 30 gigabyte drive, which for our purposes would not work very well, because by the time we get Windows 2008 server installed and Tableau server, that barely leaves any room left over for swaps. So just going to go ahead and change that to the 160 gigs, so we're going to use that whole thing. And then I'm just going to go ahead and do a review and launch. So here we're just giving us some information here. We got the R3, that's what we chose. We got 8 virtual CPUs, 61 gigabytes of memory, and 160 gig storage. And so we're just going to go ahead and hit launch at this point. Now here I'm going to cheat a little bit because I already have a pair. If you did not have a pair for your keys here, there would be a box here for you to go ahead and generate one. But if you have an existing key for EC2 services, you can select it like I have. Click yes that you have access to that, and go ahead and click launch instances. And so at this point now, it's now launching. And we can come over here and we can see that it is indeed starting up. So as soon as this thing gets started again, I'm going to come back and we'll continue. We're back, and as you can see on the screen here, our instance is up and running. One of the things that you'll notice later on is we have to get our password that's automatically generated for the administrator account for this Windows Server instance. And if you try to do this too early, you're going to get a message basically telling you to wait for 4 minutes and then try again. One of the ways that you could tell that you're good to go and will be able to get that administrator password right away is to look for this green arrow, and this two of two checks are good. That generally indicates everything is up and running and you'll be able to get that password. The other thing that we have to do is, you know, when we launch this, we use a default security group that was automatically generated for us when we launch this instance. But the one thing that we want to be cognizant of when that default one, the only traffic that's going to allow on an inbound is remote desktop or RDP, which for right now is not necessarily an issue, but later on, once we get the Tableau servers actually up and running, we're going to be able to want to connect to that with Tableau desktop as well as across HTTP. For right now, even though it's quote-unquote bad security, and you definitely want to make sure that you tighten this up. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and edit it, and I'm just going to say allow all TCP traffic in from any IP address. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. If you wanted to tighten this up a little bit, of course, and you had a static IP on the outside of your firewall, you could go ahead and provide that IP address here, and it would at least restrict that to that firewall. But for me, I'm using dynamic DNS, so I'm going to go ahead and just say I can connect to this from anywhere, and I'm going to save that. The other thing is when you change security here in EC2, it's instantaneous. So at this point, this particular box is wide open to the big bad internet off the public internet that we had there. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my instances, and I'm going to go ahead and select this, and now I'm going to want to connect. And so now you can see here's this get password, and so I'm going to go ahead and click get password, and I'm going to say choose file. And I'm cheating a little bit here simply because I already have a key pair. And then I'm going to go ahead and click decrypt password, and you'll see that your password right here will go ahead and show up. And so I'm just going to go ahead and copy that for right now off to the side. And then what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to say download the remote desktop file. What this does is basically just generates a little file that's good for Microsoft Remote Desktop. In this case, I'm running on a Mac, but you can get that in the App Store. The Microsoft RDP client is free there, or if you're on a Windows machine, of course, you'll have it there by default. And then all I have to do is, in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and click on that file that was brought up, and this is going to bring up Remote Desktop. At this point, I'm going to say go ahead and say OK, and I'm going to go ahead and say log in. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is for me it's a lot easier. I'm going to go ahead and choose to take it off full screen, kind of resize it a little bit, and then go ahead and tell it to scale. So that way it's going to scale the desktop to me. And I'm going to go ahead and log in here in a minute, and I'll be back as soon as I'm finished logging in. We're back, and I'm logged in now, all set up. And one of the first things I like to do is just go ahead and download Google Chrome, because on Microsoft Server they're very, very locked down in terms of Internet Explorer, and you really have a hard time without having to keep clicking yes, okay, and also on and futzing around with their enhanced security to be able to actually download files onto the server. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get that downloaded. I'm just going to go ahead and search for that and download that and get that installed, and then once we're back, I'm going to come back and show you how to go ahead and get Tableau server and get that started installing. So we're back here, and as you can see, I got Chrome up and running, and all we have to do to get Tableau server is to go to tableau.com and go ahead and click on this Business Intelligence Tableau server here, and try it free here. And we're going to go ahead and download this at this point, and it takes just a couple seconds. Amazon is really pretty fast in terms of the network speed here, so this download takes typically less than about 30-45 seconds. So I'll be right back as soon as that's back and we get started on the actual install. Back, and what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and at this point we've downloaded the Tableau server, so I'm going to go in here, go ahead and look at our downloads and get this started. It takes just a minute or so for Tableau server to start unpacking, unzipping all these files here. So once this is done extracting all these files and the setup part is actually started, I'll be right back. We're finished extracting the files, and we're going to go ahead and start the configuration process here. So this part right here can actually take, it's probably the longest part of the Tableau server install. So I'll be back as soon as it actually starts asking me some questions, and we'll fill those in and get the instance up and running. Next step, and what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click here that I want to start my trial now, and we'll get this started. And I'm just going to say register later just for purposes of this. And then we're going to get this kind of launching configuration dialog box here. And once that comes back, like right now, we can change some things here. We can either use local authentication. Obviously, you know, I don't know in terms of Active Directory. I've not worked with trying to integrate that off of an EC2 server. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and use local authentication. I'm going to keep the default at port 80, and I'm going to go ahead and include the sample data and users. And here we're going to go ahead and continue on in terms of configuring this. It's been saved, and now it's going to go ahead and go back to doing some more initialization. Again, this can take several minutes depending on your hardware that you're running it on. In our case, with the EC2, it usually takes about 2 or 3 minutes for this part to complete. So I'll be back as soon as it's done. File copying and everything else is done, and now we actually have a Tableau server instance up and running. The first thing we have to do is provide, you know, the root administrator account. So I'm going to go ahead and, you know, use my name here and get that set up here real quick. And that user is now added here, and it will come back here. And in this case, because I enclosed the sample data here, you can see that we now have access to that. And you can notice here that we're up and running on localhost. And so that's it for the server instance. Now, you know, the next step obviously is for us to go ahead and see if we can connect to this instance via just a typical kind of web install here. And in order to do that, what we want to do is, in this case, we want to be able to use the public IP address. That's what is going to be facing the internet, and that's what Amazon is going to go ahead and reroute through into the private IP address. If for instance, you had a database server that was also running an EC2, then you would want to set up the, you know, kind of the security between the private IP addresses. That way it's never even exposed out to the web, you know, how it's connected to which data sources where. But for our purposes, because we're trying to access this instance from outside the cloud here, we're going to use this public IP address. So we can just go into, you know, any browser. In this case, I'm using Safari here on my Mac desktop. And if we just put in that IP address here, you'll see that we do indeed get a login request, and I'm going to go ahead and log in here. And you'll notice that we are now up and running with this entire web instance at this point. So the next thing that we'll do when I come back from this is we're going to go ahead and hook up Tableau Desktop and show you how we can go ahead and publish things out onto the Tableau web server. The first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and connect into, you know, the coffee chain CSV file and get that open up here in Tableau Desktop. And so here we go. We're going to go ahead and say go to our worksheet. And the other thing I'm going to do here at this point is I'm going to go ahead and extract this data. And I'm not going to use any sort of data source filters. And I'm just going to name this extract so that way we know what it is. And it's going to go ahead and extract that data here real quick. And it looks like we're all done. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to publish this up to that server that we had. And it's going to come up here. And I'm going to go with the default. Basically let everybody go ahead and connect with it. And I'm going to go ahead and publish. And it says it's actually up there and running, so we can go back here obviously and check it out on Chrome and take a look at data sources here. And we can see that sure enough we have this sample up there on the server. So I'm going to go ahead and close desktop here just so you can see how we're going to go ahead and connect with this server again. So I'm going to pop it up just so that way you can see the data connection. And just like we did with the other pieces, you notice here that we have that same server, this IP address that's same up here, and I just put in my password here, and you can see we can indeed actually go ahead and connect to this data source. We can create some sort of a, let's swap these around here. And we're just going to go to sales here just for grins and giggles. And of course, at this point, if we want to go ahead and publish this, all we have to do is go ahead and say publish workbook out here. It's going to ask me for a name, and I'm just going to call it example. And I'm going to go ahead and say publish that. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and pop it open. It's going to ask me again to sign in again. Oops. And you can see that indeed we did publish that up there, and this thing is out there running out there on an EC2 instance. So that's really kind of the end of this. At this point, obviously, you can use this Tableau server instance like you would any other, and the advantage is you can just pay for essentially the hardware part of this as you need it. You could spin it up during office hours and shut it down after office hours if that's the way your particular office worked, or you can take advantage of being able to use a fairly large virtual machine, probably larger than you could afford without any capital expense. So that's probably really the use case here that you'd want to use is you have a need for a lot of horsepower, and you also have a need for not necessarily 24/7, although it could be run 24/7 fairly reasonably, but the use case is probably primarily for you need a lot of horsepower and you don't want the capital expense, or particularly if you're trying to do a proof of concept and you don't want to have to go out and buy the hardware and buy a license for Tableau server and desktop. You can get this proof of concept up and running in the cloud in a secure manner, and then once that's done, secure funding if you wanted that. So that would be a second use case. So appreciate you spending the time with me, and we'll see you in the next video. All right. Have a great afternoon.